Well, I think I'll get things started here. Good afternoon. My name is Pat McQuinney. I am the president of the Eden Prairie Chamber of Commerce and want to thank everybody for attending our legislative update today. I know there is a lot going on, and we got some good news on the state's budget earlier this morning, so we'll dive into a little bit of that as well. But before we get into things, just want to remind everybody to make sure that they are muted, and I'll have our elected officials unmute themselves as we get into things and go from there. Want to thank our sponsors today. They include Starkey Hearing Technologies and Excel Energy. Both are longtime supporters of the Chamber as well as our community. So we appreciate their ongoing support. Our agenda today will include the opportunity for questions at the end, but we want to dive into some of the updates on issues our elected officials are working on in Insight in the Session this year. And we'll ask a couple of the state budget questions right out of the gate, and then have them provide some updates on the issues and the items they are working on, specifically in their committees and other items. Again, as we move forward, please feel free to send me your questions via the chat feature, and I'll be sure to try and moderate those at the end, as well as providing an opportunity at the end. If you want to ask your question individually, we can manage that too. So with that, I do want to thank our elected officials for joining us. Brief bios of each of our elected officials. Senator Swedzinski represents District 48. He serves on the Education, Finance, and Policy Committee, Environment and Natural Resources Policy and Legacy Finance Committee, and is the ranking minority member of the Local Government Policy Committee. Welcome, Senator. Also joining us today, Representative Pryor. She serves District 48A. She is the Vice Chair of Early Childhood Finance and Policy Committee. Serves on the Health, Finance, and Policy Committee, the Preventive Health Policy Division Committee, and Rules and Legislative Administration Committee. Thank you for joining us as well, Representative Pryor. And then also Representative Katiza Watoon from District 48B. She is the Vice Chair of Commerce, Finance, and Policy Committee and serves on the Behavioral Health Policy Division Committee, Early Childhood Finance and Policy Committee, and Workforce and Business Development Finance and Policy Committee. As I mentioned earlier, want to dive in on some of the budget items that are very important, obviously, with our businesses. And as I mentioned earlier, we received some good news in the state budget numbers showing a projected positive balance of $1.6 billion because of higher revenue forecasts. The governor's original budget has $3 billion in tax increases, predominantly on the Minnesota private sector employers. It includes the corporate tax rate increase that would place Minnesota at 11.25% rate, which would be number 2 in the nation. A fifth tier on the income tax, which would increase by 1% over the fourth tier and put it at 10.85% on highest wage earners, and a 4% surcharge on capital gains to a rate of 14.85%, which will impact small businesses and farmers as well. Asking our elected officials, what is your position on these tax increases, and how would this impact in moving the economy forward? Senator Swedzinski, I'll have you go first, and if you would unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Appreciate it. Well, first of all, good news today, as you said. That's huge. What was it, like 9 months ago, we were looking at $4 billion deficits. And so the 10 months later, looking at over $1 billion surplus is great. And so when the governor came out with his forecast a couple months or earlier, it was not going to be as rosy, so to speak, as it is today. So with that said, I'm leaning towards supporting that fifth tax. I know it's not a popular pill to swallow, but You know, it's as I was told to me, it's only taxing people that make $20,000 a week, and the tax itself is only $8,000 a year, and 99.3% of Minnesotans will not have a tax increase, and over 1 million, if I'm getting my numbers right, 1 million Minnesotans will get a tax break, middle class, lower middle class. So, but maybe we don't need it now with the budget surplus. I don't know. But if I had to vote today, I might support that fifth tier. And so I know voting for taxes increases is never good, but most of the money is going towards our schools, and our schools are so far behind where they were in 2002 with respect to funding from the state and our universities. When I was at the U, the legislature funded 60% of tuition, and now we fund 40% of tuition. And our schools, from early childhood all the way through post-secondary, have taken a hit in the last 20 years. And so I don't know. So I'd like to see that that fifth tier created, if in fact the money is going to go for investing in our kids specifically. And I talked to Pat about this. The PPP, that's another one that I think Pat did a very persuasive job convincing me that if people thought it was is forgivable loan the correct language,
Yes.
Pat?
Yes.
If the federal government gave businesses a forgivable loan, and then all of a sudden the Minnesota turns around in taxes what they perceived was a forgivable loan, there's something that doesn't smell right about that. But I guess if I had to vote today, I would probably vote against taxing that money. As I think Pat told me, it's $400 million and now with the surplus, maybe that $400 million can stay in the hands of businesses instead of the state, and maybe that would be a good compromise between the Democrats and Republicans on the fifth tier, and giving the PPP loans, not taxing that. I don't know. That was just thought occurred to me. So, okay, is that it, Pat, or was there an eighth question?
No, I think you covered it, and you actually jumped ahead to my second question,
okay.
which is all right. But Representative Pryor, do you want to jump in and share your thoughts?
Sure. So I'm going to have to tell you right now is the forecast just came out today, and I have been in meetings all day. So when you just said what the forecast was, that was the first time I heard. So thank you for the good news. I'm glad you brought me today. And having said that, I'm going to have to tell you, I have not had time to process what that means. So you're basically catching me at a point where, I can't reasonably answer that question because, we are putting together in the House our budgets, and that would include the tax bill. And now with this new forecast, I don't know how many hours old it is. It's not something, we don't get advanced information about what it is. We find out when everybody else does too. So I'm going to have to pass on having an opinion on that. But if we want to jump ahead to the PPP question, but I have gotten lots of letters from constituents about that. And I have been talking to our tax chair and that research committee. And I know that there is, I can't tell you off the top of my head what the bill number is, but I think that has been heard now in our tax committee. And so we're definitely pursuing that as part of the final tax package in the House. But I also know from my constituents that what's hard is it's like it needs to have happened, yesterday. It's the fact that, where our budget cycle is and how we're able to put together these bills that will get passed by the end of May. We're really caught in a bad place for being able to produce what people would like to see right now. So, but I know that it's a high priority, and that people are really looking hard at it and trying to do what we can as quickly as possible on this front. So definitely heard the concerns from people, and doing our best to, do what we can to respond as quickly as possible.
Great. Representative Katiza Watun, turn it over to you next. I'll just add some comments on the PPP side since it's been brought up already. And that is PPP loans were provided over 100,000 Minnesota businesses to help them survive the impact of the pandemic. Way things are currently in Minnesota, businesses would be taxed on that. And that was going to be kind of our second question is, will Minnesota conform to the federal level and not tax that? And what might that timeline be? And I know Representative Pryor, you kind of jumped in a little bit on the timeline too. But so Representative Katiza Watun, if you could highlight the budget question, if you want to provide some context on PPP as well, that'd be awesome.
Certainly. Thank you, Pat. Thanks for having us today. It's always a pleasure to be with this group, and I'm sorry that we can't be together in person. So I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully next year, I guess. Yeah, so I actually just got off the phone a few minutes ago with the tax chair, Paul Marquardt, and I had some follow-up questions for him on the PPP plan going forward. It's House File 501, and I'm actually signing on as a co-author. So we're hoping for full conformity. I mean, that's the plan, and that's the bill as it is written right now. I don't have any additional details on like what the timeline might look like, as Representative Pryor alluded to. I mean, it certainly will hopefully be a part of the final tax package, but if we can make any movement sooner rather than later on that, I think that all of us would be on board with making sure that our businesses get that relief and kind of know where they stand for tax purposes for last year and for this year. So it's certainly been a tough year all around. As far as the governor's budget goes, Chair Marquardt actually did mention the updated forecast in our conversation too, and he said, I'm not sure what that looks like. I mean, certainly when we were dealing with much more of a deficit, we might have had a little bit more difficulty in fully conforming, and I'm not sure what the debate will look like going forward to reach a compromise. But hopefully, I mean, that's the goal, to reach full conformity and make sure our business owners are not being taxed on that money. As far as the governor's budget goes, I think, it's certainly a bold plan. I think Senator Swedzinski mentioned that so much of our state budget goes toward education. And I guess I no longer sit on the Education Finance Committee, but it is still one of my passions. And I've got 4 kids who are going to be going through our Eden Prairie Public Schools. And I know that we just want to make sure that our schools have consistent and appropriate funding as we move forward. But I think that, the Due North plan for our education system has some really important priorities in there, particularly for mental health services. Over the summer and then through the following year. I mean, there's been money from the federal government for food to make sure that no family, no children are going hungry throughout the school year and through the summers. Expanding access for out of school opportunities, and that goes down to our youngest learners as well, the littlest learners, and making sure that we're helping those childcare providers as well as families afford childcare so that parents can when it's safe to do so, be able to actually get back to work and do the work that they need to remotely here. That's what I'm dealing with today. And like I mentioned to Pat, I'm going to have to leave a little bit early today because our childcare fell through, and so I've got to zip over to preschool and pick up my daughter shortly. But I'm glad to have the time that we do have. So I'll kick it back to you, Pat, for follow-up or questions.
Yeah, just maybe a quick follow-up. One of the questions sent to us is, you mentioned the House File 501 on the conformity. Any guess on a timeline when that may be voted on? Because businesses are already working on their tax filing. So there's that issue of how quickly that might happen versus amending tax returns that get filed before it happens.
I have the status on the website up right now. So it was referred to taxes, as Representative Pryor mentioned. I believe it did get a hearing in the tax committee. I'm scrolling through the text here to see if there's a retroactive provision. It says, this section is effective the day following final enactment, except that changes incorporated by federal changes are effective retroactively at the same time the changes were effective for federal purposes. So I'm hopeful that means that pieces of that would impact 2020 filing would do so, but I can't say for certain.
Okay.
And of course, this is the way the bill reads now.
Yes, very true.
Or, before the final passage that language might change, but you know, at least that's the start point for where it is now, which I think it sounds, as I listen to that, the intent is that it would be applying to the 2020 filings, even if it's done retroactively. Okay.
I think it'll be a bill that will be followed closely because, as I mentioned, businesses are already working on those tax filings and people don't want to amend returns. So the timing of a official passing would be great. And May 15th is when S Corps and partnerships are due with their tax filings. So that's only a few weeks away. But
Yeah.
I'm going to move on and we can talk about that towards the end. I just want to give everybody an opportunity to provide updates on their committees and the items they're working on. And then we'll open it up for questions here at the very end. I'm going to start with Representative Khadija Watun. Do you want to provide some updates in terms of the committees and the other issues that you're working on and share with us? I think one of the key areas that I'm guessing you'll dive into is on the schools with the Early Childhood Finance Policy Committee and what that may mean for our school district and especially people that are dealing with remote learners and working from home.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm going to actually let Vice Chair Pryor talk a little bit more about early childhood this time around. I'm so glad to still be on that committee, and it is one of my top priorities. I'm just making sure that families do have access to the care that they need and that our littlest Minnesotans are getting the support for their brain development to be happening. I mean, as we all know, that starts even before birth. So we're working to make sure that families have the support that they need so that our Minnesotan children can grow and learn as best as possible. But I just got out of a Commerce Committee hearing earlier. We wrapped up around noon, and we heard a price gouging bill that Chair Stevenson is carrying this year. And really, it addresses kind of these emergency declarations going forward. Certainly, there is an executive order in place for this pandemic from Governor Walz, but we want to make sure that the legislature has a voice in kind of setting legislation going forward. Should there be, a weather-related emergency in a certain part of the state or whatever may happen. I mean, just looking at what happened in Texas over the past week to 10 days here, it's lucky that Texas actually has a price gouging statute in place already. And so I know that they're going to be taking action against certain companies to make sure that the people are able to afford what they need in times like this, and that there aren't going to be bad actors, just a few bad actors. Because I mean, as you all well know, and those of you on this call, Minnesotans take care of each other, and we want to do the right thing. And specifically about our retailers and businesses, for the most part, I mean, I would say upwards of 99% of businesses are doing the right thing and not trying to benefit or profit off of these rough situations that could pop up from time to time. But if those few bad actors, we want to make sure that there are regulations in place so that the Attorney General's office could take action should that be necessary. So that was a bill that got a lot of conversation today, and it's moving forward. So I look forward to kind of that hopefully being enacted into statute in the near future. In the Business Development and Workforce Development Committee, we're hearing a lot of great grant proposals for organizations who do really good work in varied communities, whether they're targeted toward youth or they're targeted toward folks who are members of the BIPOC community or whatever it may be. And so it's fascinating and wonderful to hear all the supportive organizations and programs that are out there for people to kind of make their way back into the workforce. I'm particularly committed to making sure that our workers, female workers, are able to kind of break back into the workforce after seeing the jobs numbers, the federal jobs numbers that impacted only women in the month of December. I'm not really sure how that pans out, but we know that women have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, and some women have left jobs to help kids with distance learning. And I just really want to make sure that going forward, our employers have the support that they need to bring those staff members back. Those employees have the support that they need to once again return to the workforce, so that we can all kind of continue contributing, and that everybody kind of is able to come out on the other side stronger is the hope.
Great, great. Thank you for that update. Representative Pryor, I'm going to have you go next.
Could I just add, we lost power, so I don't know if it's just our house and we didn't pay our electrical bill, but I want everybody to know next time I get bashed for lack of technology skills, that within a couple of minutes I was on the phone on this, and so I'm impressed that I've transitioned from the computer to the phone. So
I'm going to
anyways,
come to you for tech help next time, Steve.
I apologize for that we still don't have power. So
All right. Well,
I
hopefully,
know I'm impressed. I'm kind
hopefully
of
you
shocked.
get it
It made
back
my
here
day.
shortly.
So
All right. Senator Swedzinski, we're going to go to Representative Pryor, then we'll get back to you in a second, and maybe by then you'll have power back. So hopefully, Representative Pryor, you want to provide an update as well?
Sure. Well, thank you. I appreciated hearing from Carly, and I'll appreciate hearing from Steve, because, especially at this time in the session, we're kind of in our own paths and have our own committees in mind, and don't necessarily know as much about what other people are working on as what we're working on personally. And it's not till the end that it all comes together. So I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Carly. And I will go more into the early childhood, but I can say, so I have a new committee this year that's called Preventive Health. And this is where we are actually trying to kind of get ahead of things, where we know that a lot of health is not the healthcare that's delivered, but the social determinants of health. It's what surrounds a person in their community. So whether it's lead in the water or addiction to tobacco, these are the things that actually end up driving up our health care costs in the long run. So if we can look at those factors that have that data behind it to say, hey, this really makes a difference for people's health, then that's what we want to be aware of as a state, and put forward the smartest policies possible for that. So I am very, I was really happy to be selected to be on that committee. One of the things that we heard about early on was about vaccinations, and I learned a lot about vaccines that I never knew before. Our whole process for getting them certified. And this is important now, not just for COVID-19, but for all the other childhood vaccines that we have right now, and that we're seeing more and more. It's actually misinformation about vaccines that's being promoted, in good faith, but a lot of things that aren't true about it. And then we have vaccine hesitancy. And so, in terms of preventive health, the most successful thing we have in the world is vaccination programs for childhood health and for adult health too. So to learn about that process, and one thing that I learned was that with a vaccine, it's not enough that it be safe and reliable, which we expect from any kind of medication, that it be safe, that it be effective is the other word, safe and effective. But with a vaccine, it actually has to be better than alternatives. So even if an alternative, safer than an alternative and better than an alternative. So some people will say, well, it's better to get the measles than the vaccine for the measles. And our program, what it guarantees is that's not true, that it is safer to give your child the vaccine for the measles than to get the measles, which most of us understand especially if you're of an age where you understand what the measles was about. So that's an example of, I think, some good work that we're doing in the committee. And then my other committee is the Health, Finance, and Policy. And that has a lot of really wonky, detailed stuff. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is bring down the cost of healthcare for our public dollars, but also to make sure that we are promoting, healthcare in Minnesota so that we keep up our healthy population. And one area that we're working on is prescription drug costs, and to try to, bring some transparency to that system, and to make sure that when we see these big hikes in whether it's insulin or EpiPen, that we can actually bring some accountability to say, why is it costing this much? And what can we do as a public sector in Minnesota to prevent those kinds of what seems to be price gouging in prescription medication. So it's, we don't have a lot that we can impact at the state level. Most of it's a national program, but we are trying to bring forward good bipartisan policies that will impact prescription drug costs. So then finally, back to early childhood, which Carly and I both have as our kind of our passion. And we've had just a great series of meetings. And if people could just watch those meetings, I think that it's kind of their life changing. And the first thing we talk about is how important those first 1,000 days are to the development of a human being, and how you're born with a brain, but that brain does not become human until the experiences that you have in those first 1,000 days. And the other part of this data that we're hearing is that, some kids do not get that nurturing experience that they need for human development. And the effects of what they missed out at that early age, you'll see as they become adults. And this is where they talk about, they'll compare these different life circumstances that a person has in those first 3 years, and then they'll follow it out to adulthood. And those people are still living have lower incomes, more health problems. The list goes on and on. So, that's kind of where we started was, and I think people know this. It's not a secret. I think that we know because we've had those experiences. We've seen a baby. We know how important it is to nurture that baby. But there's also so much data from all kinds of sources talking about the impact. And so when we see in our school district, the kids that did not get that great start, they're behind when they go to kindergarten. And sometimes it seems the best we can do is make sure they don't fall any farther behind. And even that's a real struggle. So that's kind of where I start, is the early childhood, is how important this is to a state for today and for our future, not just for the next 5 years, but for the next decades. What our policies are around children and supporting children and families in those crucial years. So we're talking about, and we are falling behind in Minnesota, kind of in our investments in that area, especially in our childcare sector. And that's something that I'm sure you're seeing as businesses, how difficult it is for families to find affordable childcare. So these are the things that we're struggling with, and trying to put forward real world solutions to this incredible real human dilemma that we have in Minnesota, as we do in most other states. And that's the work that we're doing, and that I'm just so grateful that I can be part of.
Great, thank you. Senator Swedzinski, do you want to provide some updates?
Just overall, I guess I missed the initial question.
Oh, all right. Yeah, looking for some general overall updates on either items that you're working on or kind of on the session itself.
Yeah, the session itself has been, it's no secret we're the only divided legislature in the country. Democrats, in a sense, controlled by the Republicans. So certainly that has its strengths and its weaknesses to overcome. But a couple things that I'm pretty hopeful for, and I see Josh is in on the call. We had an entire education committee hearing Wednesday on getting more teachers of color into our schools, and there were 4 or 5 different bills introduced, running the gamut. But I think the good news is it's the goal. We all agree we need more teachers of color in our classrooms. 40% of our kids are kids of color, and only 2 to 4% of the teachers are teachers of color. And the silver lining of the last 12 months has exposed the opportunity achievement, vulnerability gap, whatever you're comfortable calling it. And so I think this is one step in the right direction. I know Eden Prairie's at the forefront of that. They got a grant last year that the legislature provided for that. We have a class, and Josh can correct me if I'm wrong, about 20 kids signed up for it. It's basically kids that are thinking about a career in education, predominantly kids of color, and they can learn about wanting to become a teacher. But I went to their graduation, so to speak, and about half the kids don't want to become teachers now because they realize how hard they work after taking the class. So I thought that was a cute comment by one of the kids. So we're working on that, and I'm still trying. I think the chamber would love to hear this. I'm trying to get a financial literacy class required in our schools, and it's the same argument, the mandate upon local schools and the resistance. But boy, it just seems like when you bring it up to any adult with kids, that, do you think your kid should have had a financial literacy class in high school? They're always, oh my God, yeah, and they got all these anecdotes and examples. And with respect to feelings about the Page amendments, for it or against it, please reach out to us. I can't speak for my colleagues, but I'm currently to it, but nonetheless, it's getting everybody talking about education, and it's a wonderful opportunity to seize. And so I applaud Kashkari and Page for getting that ball going, that we're all talking about education right now. And anyway, so that, if you're having a strong opinion on that, share it with us. And another thing that we're talking a lot about versus the 3-tier, and should craft beer be allowed to sell within their brewery. And so that's an issue that we're kind of struggling with, because the labor unions are in, so to speak. And so and then an environmental committee, that's always fun committee to be on, just because the environmental thing, and zero emission vehicles and low emission vehicles, who would have thought there'd be a partisan debate on that, but there are some pretty compelling arguments that we don't need those in Minnesota. I'm opposed to those arguments, but my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are making those arguments. And then on local government, the other committee that I'm really enjoying, it's a classic example in how a bill becomes a law or doesn't become a law. I introduced Rick Getchow, the city manager for Eden Prairie, asked me to help him get rid of the salary cap on city employees, and I'm like, yeah. So I introduced it, and the chair of the state government committee said, nope, I'm not going to hear it. So we reintroduced the bill, and now we got into local government, and the chair of that committee is lukewarm, so to speak, on hearing that bill. And I think it would pass the House. I don't know. Lori or Carly might have more insight into that, but nonetheless, so that's that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Senator. I know you're breaking up a little bit. At some point, I may have you just call my cell phone. I'll put you on speaker, but we'll keep trying what we have. And if it keeps freezing up, I'll just have you call and we'll work it that way. But I've received a couple of questions as it relates to business openings and executive orders by the governor, and want to be sure we cover that topic. And basically, we've heard from businesses that are concerned in their ability to survive. And we know of weddings and events that would have happened here at member facilities in Eden Prairie are now gone in Wisconsin. where there's greater certainty on rules and timelines and what's available for the ability to hold those types of events. There are proposals to move from the governor using his executive order powers to an approach with the leaders of the House and Senate and working with the governor jointly. Where do you stand in how businesses should be allowed to open fully? And how does this pertain to the governor's executive orders, or at some point giving those up or relinquishing those? So I'm going to start with you, Representative Pryor, if you could provide some insight on that.
Mhm. Sure. So I think where we are right now is that there's kind of like dual tracks right now. I mean, the legislature is in session. And we are hearing bills, we're passing bills. We have a time for public input on things. Right now we have in the House, we have a committee that's looking at all of these issues surrounding emergency orders and putting together a bill to, you know, but again, putting together a bill that has public insight or public oversight and input to for it to go forward. So, but we still have the governor's emergency orders so that things can the executive orders that he's had right now can change with the situation. So as the numbers go down, we know that it's safe to open up things. But on the other hand, you know, we're not out of the woods. And if you follow the news carefully, you know that there's new variants. There's one in New York right now that's circulating that is extraordinarily concerning. So it's like, and the legislature, you know, I love my fellow legislators. Well, but we do not act quickly, and not everyone invests enough time to really understand every issue is, the ins and out of every issue. And we rely a lot on staff, and it would be very difficult to do the right thing at the right time if we had to do it legislatively throughout an emergency, which this pandemic continues to be. So I think where we are right now is that, you know, me as a legislator, I hear from the governor's office all the time. Just last night, we were on a call with the Commissioner of Health and her staff, hearing about the rollout of the vaccine and how that's working. We're asking our questions, we're giving our input, we're participating in the process. So I think there's a lot of things that are working well. But the other thing is, as you know, as we get through this pandemic, which right now I think, you know, everybody feels like we are getting through it because of the vaccine and the success of that of the vaccines that have been developed right now. We seem to be getting through it. There's going to be a time where we can process this and try to make it right. And probably improve on something that we could have seen was coming, but we never really thought would come, which is what the pandemic that we're living through right now, knowing that it's been 100 years since it's happened before. But as our world's changed, it might be less than 100 years before it happens again. So I think it's not a quick process, but I think it's a process that's going on right now, in addition to everything else that we're trying to do, which is, you know, still come up with our budget. We still have kids that need to go to school, and we need to be there to support them catching up to what was lost because of the virus, and everything else that we just have on an ongoing basis in our state, and we keep working on it.
Great, I appreciate that. I have Senator Swedzinski here via speakerphone, so hopefully you guys will be able to hear his response. Senator, the question that was asked was revolving around getting businesses fully open and the governor's executive orders. I think you and I had a conversation about weddings and events going to other states that could have been held here, and then where things stand today in terms of executive orders and that power, and how there's bills being presented about working jointly with the House and Senate leaders with the governor on moving forward. Could you provide some insight in your thoughts on getting businesses fully open and how it relates to the governor having that executive order ability today?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I would side with safety. You know, last week there was a bill introduced to reopen our schools 100%, and you know, and yesterday we debated for 4 hours that the governor shouldn't be allowed to, you know, close businesses unless well, I can get to that in a second. But so, and I voted to take the safe side on reopening schools and the safe side on reopening businesses. And I know it's controversial. We're gonna all have to let history judge this one, and whether or not from day one we screwed this up, or whether or not we did do the right thing, and you know, lives were saved, and yes, people's livelihoods and incomes suffered greatly, but you know, we saved a few lives. I guess I'd rather err on the side of a couple lives were saved rather than businesses. But you know, it's a tough one. No one. Somebody that's invested their, you know, their sweat and their blood and toil into starting a new business, and then to find out the governor shuts it down. But hopefully, between, you know, PPP and unemployment and all the investments the state and the federal government has made, you know, I don't know. But yesterday the debate was basically to prohibit the governor from doing anything unless both houses vote by majority to allow him, and then there had to have been a 14-day notice. The part of the bill that I do agree with is people need more than a 72-hour or 36-hour notice that they're going to be allowed to reopen. And so I did find that 14-day notice was something I wished it had been a standalone bill. I think they would have been more votes for that, but the vote was almost along party lines. I do think one or two Democrats voted with the Republicans to take those powers away from the governor. But so far, you know, the governor has surrounded himself with health experts and experts in epidemiology, if that's even the right ology. I apologize. Anyways, I have faith that the governor's doing the right thing and saving a few lives. But hopefully this will all be something we process in the coming months, and we're all back on full board and going to the state fair, and our schools I know Eden Prairie's up and running March 22nd. I hope it goes smoothly and we take the safety precautions necessary. And but it's been a tough year, as everybody knows, and it's been hard for Carly and Lori and I to do the right thing by everybody, and we hope history judges how we dealt with this correctly and properly. So
great, thank you. We're gonna go to questions now. I know that if Ann Schuster's on here, she had forwarded some questions for me, but Ann, if you're there and want to unmute yourself, otherwise, I know we have some other questions too.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have unmuted myself. And I think to a great extent, my question's actually been answered yesterday when they released the vaccine info. I was advocating for restaurant workers to be vaccinated in the same pool as grocery store workers, and it looks like that was included that way, where previously I had not seen it written like that. So for now, we're good.
Good, good. I'm glad to hear that. I think to Ann's point, her and other restaurants have talked to us about this. There's servers serving people who no longer are wearing masks as they eat and drink at the establishments, and want to make sure that they had some priority on vaccinations.
And I'm gonna jump in and just wonder if anybody's like me, which is like, you go through the list of everybody that gets a vaccine before you do. So restaurant workers, they're gonna get one before me too, but it's the right thing to do. And so this is what we always have, what we have to do right now. Right now, in Minnesota, there's not enough vaccine for everybody that wants one. much less, everyone that should have one that really is at these higher risks, like somebody that works in a restaurant where people are taking off their masks and eating because that's what you do in a restaurant. So there's, but it looks good though that production is ramping up. So that beginning in April and May and June, in those months, all of us that want to be vaccinated will have that opportunity to be vaccinated. And so it's like, let's just keep it together, and just know that it's changing rapidly, and that even when I say April, May, and June, things might go a little bit even faster than that. And having lots of good discussions with the Department of Health, they are working desperately to put an infrastructure in place so that when the vaccines arrive in this state, they can get out to people as quickly as possible. And then the other, another point to remember about the vaccine is, what they're saying is like every arm that the vaccine goes into makes each of us safer, because that's another person that's not going to be even unknowingly spreading COVID. So, the vaccination program is, it's something that we're thinking about all the time and keeping track of, and we just want to make sure all the resources we can are put into it. So yes, and to Irene's question about vaccine safety. So even like in general, the vaccine safety, the risk is to the individual, not to a population. So they showed that yes, it's less risky for an individual to receive the vaccine than not to receive the vaccine. And that's what we're basing on, not population, but for an individual to be safe.
Great. Just jumping in on energy, I know it was brought up a little bit earlier about a slight mention on what happened in Texas. I think we're fortunate enough our energy here is pretty reliable and affordable, and I think that's always one of the things we want to make sure continues moving forward. I know the governor and others have put forward some pretty aggressive goals on trying to get to carbon free and going green. Can you maybe touch a little bit more on this? Because what happened in Texas, obviously we feel for them and don't want that happening elsewhere, but in terms of the ability to have reliable energy and also making sure that's affordable, do you see the state of Minnesota needing to make sure it still has multiple levels of energy sources to stay energy neutral, so to speak, in terms of providing energy when things happen that we don't anticipate? And Senator Swedzinski, I'll start with you on that.
Yeah, that's again, thank you for that question. It's boy, where do we start? I am on the environmental committee, so we're getting a lot of we haven't talked yet about what happened in Texas because it's so new, but we've been talking a lot this session about renewable energy, and as I alluded to earlier, the zero emission and low emission vehicles. And it's so much more complicated than you would ever believe. So many different stakeholders coming from so many different points of view, when all we really want to do is move the state forward and be carbon neutral. And so I think Lori or Carly will correct me, but is it 2035 or something is when we're hoping to be all based on renewable energy. I apologize, I don't have the exact date. And so that's, that's a good goal, and I favor that. And so, but it's just so interesting in that so many solar panels and storage batteries need all these high-end minerals that would come out of polymet and twin metals, the mining up on the northern Minnesota, which I'm opposed to, and yet we need those metals in order to have, like I said, the solar panels and the storage batteries that the renewable energy industry relies on. So it's just, it's coming at us from all different sides, but I do believe we all support getting and leaving the world a little bit better of a place for our kids to breathe the air and the water and toil the soil. And so anyways, I hope I answered the question, but anyways.
Yeah, I think Representative Pryor, I think the one piece to maybe the senator's response is, making sure that these are reliable and affordable. And so what do you see and what's your thoughts on this issue?
Well, so there's a couple points that I have to make. One is that, first of all, Minnesota doesn't have fossil fuel. So, and wind and sun are free. So I know at the end of the day, in terms of affordability, that works for Minnesota on that, that high level of understanding. I think that I know that as we get closer and closer to that goal of completely 100% clean energy, it's going to be the last, closing out the last portion of that that's going to be more challenging. And that's why, we say it's a goal and not try to somehow mandate it and enforce it, because we know that we are probably going to be making rapid process in terms of the electrical grid that we have right now, that we move over into the clean energy. And that's going to be great for Minnesota. And I guess then also when we put out a goal like that, it also invites the businesses that we would develop in Minnesota to say, yep, Minnesota is a place where clean energy is real. They've made the commitment to it. So as a business, I'm going to make that commitment to it also. And I've been able to meet many of these businesses, some of them in my district that work with solar installations, do this kind of work, and that you attract from all over the world the experts in this area when they know Minnesota is a place that's committed to clean energy. And then one final point is, I think there's an energy we can't afford, and that energy is the energy that's going to be destroying our planet. By the extreme weather that we're seeing now, and kind of the inevitable degradation of environments as change happens too rapidly. So we know that, yes, on Earth, we do go through these phases of cold and warm, but it's the rate of change that's causing extinctions. Minnesota might not be a place that you recognize 30 years from now if we stay on the path that we're on right now. So there's an energy that we really can't afford, and I think it's the energy that we're using right now. And this switch over needs to happen in a deliberate and pragmatic way, but it needs to happen.
Great. Received a question as it relates on education, and we work closely with our school districts, and I know it's important on distance learning versus in-person, as well as dollars for our school districts. So I know that talking with Dr. Swanson at Eden Prairie Schools, that his staff and his team there have done a great job. They've been doing more in-person learning than almost all other metro districts. But of course, school funding is usually part of the formula that the state of Minnesota has. Can you maybe provide some update in terms of things you might be working on as it relates to additional school funding? It was mentioned earlier as we talked about the budget the governor put forward. Are you working on putting dollars into the formula and not just one-time money? And then a second question, it's a bit of a follow-up to that, is we're a divided government here in the state of Minnesota. So how are you working to ensure that these things are done in a bipartisan way so that we don't end up with a stalemate? And Representative Pryor, I'll start with you and then go to Senator Swedzinski.
Are we no longer on the call?
Carly had to leave. She had daycare issues, Senator.
Yeah.
And I still don't have power, so I appreciate everybody's patience.
Perfect.
I think that both in the House and the Senate, we're working on, the education funding that will make up for it's kind of complicated. There's the short term to make up for for what the challenges have been during the pandemic, and the shift to distance learnings that had to happen and what that meant to the normal school days and the normal school budgets. So there's that short term that we have to make up, but then we still have to keep moving ahead with the actual cost of providing, a great education to every school child in Minnesota. And I think that's an area that we've been falling behind, and that we still need to continue to try to pick up ground and to make sure that we are fully funding our schools. So that's a stand that I took when I first ran, and it's a stand that I'm still taking now, that I think that we need to fully fund our schools, and that I also think that we have not been doing that, and that we need to keep working on doing that, because that is our future. I think that's what's good for business, because it's good for families, and that's why people move to Minnesota, is because they want someplace where they can raise a family and their kids can get an education, and we've got a workforce for the future.
Great. Senator, do you want to provide some input on that as well?
Yeah, the general formula, the increase in the governor's budget's 1% and then 2.5%. That's the formula. And then there's a lot of extra money going to schools in every way, shape, and form. Like I said, we just got a 34-page PowerPoint this week from the governor and the Department of Education, and there's just so much wonderful things in there that are going to make our schools so much stronger. And like one of the things that's just buried in this bill is $1 million for the mental health of our teachers and the critical staff that works alongside our teachers. And that's a lot of those teachers are. And I'm not telling you anything you haven't heard a million times, but our teachers are working twice as hard with not many of the rewards that why they went into teaching. So they've had a tough year, and so a lot of them may be hurting and could use a little help with their mental health. And so I love that. But the one thing in the bill that I just loved, and I hope Josh is still on this call. There's it's like I said, a 34-page PowerPoint, and the last line on page 33, and I got it out right now, reads requiring respectful lunch policies. And as soon as requiring respectful lunch policies, as soon as I saw that, I cracked up, because I wanted to know if the governor intends that to mean for kids or for staff, because I don't think any teacher I've ever known has had a 30-minute lunch since they became teachers. Most teachers eat in about 8 to 12 minutes, and so that cracked me up as soon as I saw that. So, but I think in my opening remarks I did allude to there's a hefty investment in our schools, and I'm not surprised that a governor that did teach for almost 20 years, Solstice, and coached has come through with what I think most Minnesotans will be proud of. And as Lori said, people move to Minnesota because of our schools, and so I think it's good. I'm very proud.
Good. I know we're at that 1:30 time, but want to do just open it up one final time. I've been monitoring the chat and some emails that have come in. That's where I've been pulling some of these questions. Any final questions from our attendees? All right. Well, with that, again, I want to thank Senator Swedzinski, Representative Pryor, and Representative Khadijah Wattoon for joining us today. I know Representative Khadijah Wattoon shared her information on reaching her. I would highly encourage everyone to stay in contact with her and Representative Pryor and Senator Swedzinski, as I know the committee deadline's coming up, as well as things heat up with this new budget report. I think there'll be some opportunities and hopefully ways to reduce our tax burden, or some of the proposals out there in our businesses. And we'd love to see the PPP conformity done sooner than later. With that, we'll let everyone go. We will publish the recording of this as soon as it becomes available. So if individuals were not able to join us that you know of, we will share that probably sometime early next week. With that, enjoy your afternoon and thank you for being part of our program.